Chapter 1. The Old Man Sinclair. Hi, my name's Buddy Palumbo, and I guess this stuff all started back in the spring of '52, when I was working as head mechanic at Old Man Finzio's Sinclair station in Passaic, not a year out of high school. Actually, I was more or less the only mechanic working at the Sinclair back then, on account of Old Man Finzio wasn't exactly what you could call a whiz around a set of tools, which made you wonder why he picked the garage business in the first place. But you couldn't just flat out ask him, "Hey, jackass, why'd you ever want to go into the garage business?" because he'd spit right in your eye. Old Man Finzio is one of those mean, scrawny old farts who walk like there's no oil in their joints and kick stray dogs just for the fun of it. And he always managed to have a 3 or 4 day growth of stubble on his chin, all the time, which made you wonder sometimes how he did it. I mean, you either shave every couple of days or it eventually grows out into a beard, right? But not Old Man Finzio. No, sir. It was one of those eternal mysteries, like they talk about in church. Now don't get me wrong, the old man was pretty sharp about running his gas station, and no question he knew a thing or two about automobiles. He just wasn't any good at fixing them. Didn't have the hands for it, or the patience. Oh, he could change a tire okay, or maybe flush out a radiator, but he'd get stuck, and I mean stuck, on jobs a real mechanic could breeze right through without even thinking about it. Especially if he hit a frozen up bolt or a rounded off nut hidden away under an exhaust manifold or water pump pulley where you couldn't hardly get at it. Or take a simple brake job. Often as not, he'd get one of the drums wedged all cattywampus on the axle, and naturally, the harder he tugged, beat, and levered on it, the worse it got. Why, he'd squint and sneer and spit at that brake drum, cussing a blue streak through the few teeth he had left, and pretty soon he'd be reaching for the cutting torch. Within minutes, he'd have the whole damn business glowing bright cherry red and be wailing away like a country blacksmith with the biggest damn sledgehammer in the shop. By the time he was done, the brake drum, wheel studs, and mounting flange would be junk, and sometimes he'd even get the wheel cylinders. So you can see how important it was for the old man to have a decent mechanic working for him at the Sinclair. Old Man Finzio's gas station was right down the street from my folks' house in Passaic, and I'd pass it every day on my way home from school. Usually I'd stop by after classes and just kind of hang around for a few hours, maybe even help out a little here and there. I don't really know why, but I always liked watching automobiles get fixed. It fascinated me how cars were made of all these strange-looking chunks of metal and snaky rubber tubes and endless strands of copper wire, all of it carefully pieced together like some enormous jigsaw puzzle. And if all those bits and pieces were bolted together just right, you could twist a key and it would come alive and turn into a living, breathing, ready for street prowling steel animal. But the best part was when a car stopped working, when it died, a sharp mechanic could bring it back to life again, good as new, maybe even better. A guy could feel pretty damn swell about something like that. But I was a son, and somehow that was different, especially since my dad was a big union shop steward over at this chemical plant in Newark, and naturally he wanted me to come to work there too. He even had this notion I ought to save up and maybe go off to college someplace to study chemistry, while I figured I was damn lucky just to make it through high school algebra. Hell, it took me 2 tries. Besides, I was 18, and all I really wanted in life was to get out of school, fix cars at the Sinclair, and goof around with Julie whenever I got the chance. But my old man wasn't having any part of it.
"You're going to work down at the chemical plant, see? And that's the way it's going to be."
This chemical plant job paid union scale, which was a hell of a lot of money for a kid just out of high school. But I just flat couldn't stand it. The place was hot and dark and smelled something awful. And every day was the same stupid grind over and over and over again. I never understood how those union guys could keep doing it, day after day, week after week, year after year, without going batty one morning and blowing the brains out. Every single day they'd swap the same wisecracking hellos, put on the same baggy coveralls, hard hats, and safety goggles, drink the same thermos of coffee, eat the same tin box lunches, and spend 8 solid hours loading and unloading drums of chemical shit that made your eyes burn and your nose run like a damn faucet. You'd work as slow as you could get away with, always a matter of fierce professional pride in any union shop. And every night you'd hear the same stale dick jokes in the shower, blow the same weird yellow-green globs of snot out your nostrils, and head home for a few beers and dinner before going to bed, just so you could get up in the morning and do it all over again. You call that a life? Big Ed Baumstein owned the first Jaguar sports car I ever saw. It was an XK120 Roadster, creamy white with red leather upholstery, and my whole world stopped cold the first time he wheeled it into the station in the early spring of 1952. I'll never forget the bright spring morning Big Ed wheeled his shiny new Jag up to the pumps for the very first time. Jesus, I'd never seen a car like that in my life. The bodywork arched and curled from one end to the other like some huge steel jungle cat. And the sound was perfect too. A rich, buttery growl that just seemed to purr its way out the tailpipes. Jaguar. Boy, they sure picked the right name for that automobile. Big Ed grinned at me with his dollar cigar sticking up like an exclamation point.
What do you think?
I ran my eyes up and down that swoopy bodywork, trying to take in all the curves at once.
Boy, it sure is something.
Want to go for a ride?
Oh, geez, I don't know. Old man Finzio will have himself a conniption fit if I just take off.
Screw him. Come on, climb aboard.
Needless to say, I decided to chance it. Only I couldn't find the door handle. Big Ed let out a huge laugh. And then he reached over to open it from the inside. That's how you open the door on an XK120 Roadster, by pulling on this leather-covered cord on the inside of the door panel. Right away, I could see this car was different from the Fords, Chevys, and even Cadillacs I was used to. I also noticed Big Ed was wedged in just about solid between the seat back and the steering wheel. Big as it was, and that XK120 was goddamn big for a two-seater automobile. It didn't really have much in the way of gut, chest, or shoulder room for a guy the size of Big Ed Baumstein. To this day, I remember leaning back in that rich red leather upholstery for the very first time. It smelled like fine kid gloves and felt just as soft against my skin. Warm, too, as if some elegant lady's hands were still inside him. Then Big Ed revved her up and dumped the clutch. He was never real arty with a stick shift, and we squealed away from the pumps in a haze of burning rubber. I caught a glimpse of old man Finzio out the corner of my eye as we rocketed out onto Pine Street, and he just stood there and stared, dumbstruck, you know, as if Big Ed's Jaguar was a naked blonde on roller skates. XK120s did that to everybody. They were so damn gorgeous, it made your eyes ache just to look at them. Big Ed drove out past the edge of town and gave it a quick blast in second and third. Jeez, was that car ever fast?
That's 80, and we're not even on a third yet.
Right at that exact moment, with hair whipping in my eyes and the howl of that big twin Cam 6 filling my ears and the white lines on the highway coming at me like tracer bullets, right then, I fell in love with Jaguars.
You got to understand how it is with these sports cars. The people who buy them could all drive bleeding Cadillacs if they wanted. Cars like that bloody great black sedan you rolled up in.
His eyes glazed over just thinking about Big Ed's 60 Special.
Oh, those are some marvellous smooth cars, Cadillacs are.
You could tell Barry Spline really admired caddies.
But that's not what these flipping people want. Oh no. They claim to like the hard ride and the heavy steering and enough bloody heat through the floorboards to roast bleeding chestnuts. These people enjoy the engine racket and picking insects out of the air after every bleeding run to market. And believe me,
He raised an important finger up toward the rafters.
they absolutely live for their roadside breakdowns and expensive repairs.
Barry Spline looked me squarely in the eye.
And do you know why?
I shook my head.
Because they're all bloody masochists.
They're what?
Masochists.
What the hell are masochists?
Barry Spline licked his lips and thought for a moment.
Before intercourse, have you ever been tied down to a bed with fine silk ropes and had someone go over your private parts with an egg beater?
I couldn't say as I had.
Neither have I. But the point is that a bloody masochist enjoys such things as pain, suffering, and humiliation.
I looked it up in my aunt's dictionary when I got home, and Barry Spline was telling the truth. Honest he was. With Julie by my side and Big Ed's greenbacks burning a hole in my trousers, nothing would do but that we rode all 4 roller coasters, one right after the other. Not to mention the flying turns and the Flash Gordon sky scooters, and stopped at every concession stand along the midway for caramel corn and peanut pralines and chocolate fudge, and even a butterscotch ice cream sundae shoveled in on top of the olive burgers, onion rings, and spiked root beer we'd already packed away. We were having a swell time, and I kept asking Julie if she wanted to maybe go on the Tunnel of Love boat ride with me. I figured I might get a kiss off her back there in the darkness where nobody could see. But Julie wasn't having any part of it, on account of one of her girlfriends told her she'd seen a rat in there once. Heck, it was probably just a mouse, you know? But there was no change in her mind. So I switched tactics and steered us over by the Ferris wheel. I thought perhaps I could do some good when it stopped up at the very top, high over the midway. Just the 2 of us, all by our lonesome up there in the nighttime sky. It didn't quite work out that way. Now, you've probably been to an amusement park yourself and noticed how stately and graceful a Ferris wheel looks from a distance. In fact, you'd swear they were powered by the world's smoothest ever fluid drive. But climb aboard one of those suckers and you discover that they clank and creak and scrape and shudder every time they move. And the damn things have to start and stop every 20 seconds or so to load and unload passengers. So it takes absolutely forever to go all the way around, which leaves a person entirely too much time to look down at the ground, way down at the ground, and likewise glance around at all the rust-infected rivets, guy wires, clevis pins, and turnbuckles that hold your average Ferris wheel together. Confidence-inspiring they are not. In fact, if you have any sort of mechanical aptitude whatsoever, they can get you very nervous indeed. To make matters worse, there was a stiff breeze blowing in off the Hudson that night, making the gondola sway back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. About 50 feet up, Julie's face suddenly turned the same shade of green the Hudson River gets in the summertime.
Hey, Julie, you feeling okay?
She opened her mouth to answer, but all that came out was a sickly sort of groan. Followed shortly thereafter by approximately $5 worth of olive burgers, onion rings, rum-laced root beer, and assorted candy snacks. Fortunately, she managed to blow most of it over the rail. Unfortunately, it landed on the gondola just below us. Jesus, you should have heard all the yelling and screaming. Those people were very unhappy. Pretty vocal about it, too. After she was finished, Julie's face changed color again, this time to a kind of chalky off-white, and she sagged back in the seat, not looking well at all.
Hey, Julie, you feeling all right?
She half nodded as she wiped off her chin, while I made sure her head stayed pointed in the opposite direction.
You think you can walk?
She looked at me with this blank expression.
How about run? Huh, Julie? You think you can run?
Julie didn't understand what I was getting at, but the instant we hit bottom, I grabbed her arm and took off lickety-split down the midway, fast as I could go, dragging her behind like a coaster wagon with a busted wheel. We sure didn't want to be around when that next gondola car hit the ground level. Not hardly. Colin's foreign car business grew and prospered over the years in spite of the high prices, shoddy service, and the business ethics of an Armenian rug merchant. That's because every single playboy, sugar daddy, and black sheep heir in the greater metropolitan New York area just had to have himself one of those sexy new Jaguars, or at the very least an MG. As Colin explained repeatedly to every Virgin sales prospect.
A true sport requires a true sports car.
And the rich, trendy, fashionable types around town were all ears. Colin St. John sold just about everything that crossed the Atlantic at one time or another, including such gems of European automotive artistry as the Renault Dauphine, Hillman Husky, Humber Super Snipe, and the usual assortment of Fiats. But his main stock in trade was always Jaguars and MGs. Business was better than good, and Westbridge moved to larger quarters in 1951. Colin made himself a lot of money during the 1950s. But success in the car business came naturally to Colin, since he grew up in the motor trade, as he called it, and knew all the ropes to pull, fancies to tickle, and angles to shoot. His father owned a garage near London that sold rough, high-mileage Rolls-Royces and Bentleys to people who probably should have bought a new Ford instead. And Colin learned at his father's knee that the key feature in any automotive transaction was a split between how cheap you could buy and how high you could sell, after bumping out a few dents and covering it all with a quick and dirty respray anyway. Barry Spline told me a great story about a would-be gentleman who bought a well-abused Bentley from Colin's dad, then tried to return it the same afternoon after hitting a pothole and knocking a chunk the size of a league ball out of the rocker panel. Underneath was nothing but a huge rust crater filled with watered-up newspaper. As you can imagine, the guy was pretty upset.
Look at this!
He waved his fist under Colin's father's nose.
You told me this car was in absolutely pristine condition.
Oh, I truly thought it was. The agent I bought it through has always been totally reliable in the past.
He wrung his hands as though his entire faith in human decency had been savagely trampled.
Just imagine. The scoundrel swore it came from an estate sale. Told me the motor car belonged to a third cousin of the Duke of Windsor himself. Why, to think anyone would have the brass to patch up a Bentley with putty and old newspaper.
Old?
The guy grabbed Colin's dad by the necktie.
Why, this is yesterday morning's bloody first edition.
Of course, Colin's Manhattan dealership was entirely different from his father's used car garage in England, on account of the new car and used car businesses were, to use Colin's words,
as different as chalk and cheese.
After a few shots of scotch, he'd explain at length how the retail car business worked.
You see, every used car is unique, has its own character, its own perfume, its own romance, while every new automobile is essentially identical to every other blasted one they push off the assembly line. The only real differences are color and trim.
I didn't really get it, but Colin went on to explain.
If you boil it down to essentials, you realize that the price of a used car is governed only by the glimmer in a chap's eye or the faintly detectable quickening of his pulse, while the profit on a new car is sadly subject to the eternal and inescapable laws of supply and demand.
Colin St. John understood those laws perfectly, and that's why he kept every shipment of new Jaguars stashed in a windowless meat truck garage on the other side of town. All except one, that is, which he would place on the little 12x16 oriental carpet in front of the fake maple partition that separated Colin's showroom from the rest of the Westbridge shop. That's how every single XK120 Colin had came to be
absolutely the last one in the country.
And he wasn't above taking multiple deposits, or multiple futures on the next one coming in, and using the money for general operating expenses. Plus, there was always a story, a little romance. For example,
this particular example was ordered for the Earl of Buxton. He summers in the Hamptons, don't you know? But the poor chap was killed in a hunting accident before he could take delivery. Happened just a fortnight ago. Most unfortunate business. On safari in Africa with his new bride. Don't think she was a day over 18. It was quite the scandal in the House of Lords when the poor devil got himself trampled by a charging bull elephant. Bloody gun jammed. A shame, really. And the lads in Coventry worked so hard to match that precise shade of royal blue from the family crest.
Colin's upscale New York customers ate it up.